It's Monday, 19 October. My name's Juan Brown. You're watching the Blancolirio channel, and today we've got another video regarding fuel management with the recent loss of a Cirrus SR22 aircraft right here near Yuba City, California. This accident occurred on 13 October and was another successful deployment of the Cirrus CAPS system, the Cirrus Airframe Parachute System. By the way, the aircraft ended up touching down just 8 miles shy of its destination airport, which I believe was Colusa County Airport. According to Kathryn's report here, a small airplane carrying 3 people had to deploy its parachute and make an emergency landing near rural Sutter County, authorities say. The plane landed in a rice field near the 3900 block of Schlag Road, about 10 miles southwest of Yuba City, just after 5 p.m. Tuesday. According to the FAA, a Cirrus SR22 pilot reported that he had run out of fuel while flying to Colusa County Airport from Hollywood Burbank Airport. That's located in Southern California. On the day of this incident, we did have strong northerly winds aloft and on the surface, which would have produced a substantial headwind for this particular flight plan on that particular day. The pilot then deployed the plane's parachute, and the craft came to a rest in a field about 8 miles southwest of the Sutter County Airport, just 8 miles shy of his destination. From pictures taken after the plane touched down, it appears the aircraft landed upside down. All 3 people, which was not the case. All 3 people on board were not hurt in the emergency landing, the FAA says. Winds were strong enough to move the airplane again on Wednesday, so they crashed on Tuesday. And the odd thing about this accident, and looking at the Cirrus manual, the parachute was never cut away from the aircraft. So once they touched down in a rice field and got out of the aircraft and left the aircraft overnight with the parachute still attached. Well, the parachute's still in full blossom, getting pulled by the north winds. Overnight, it ends up dragging the aircraft across the field, flipping it upside down, through a ditch, and there's a picture of the aircraft in a ditch, engine submerged underwater, causing substantial damage to the airframe. More damage done to the airframe after the crash by not getting the parachute cut away than the crash itself. So my first question for Cirrus owners is there a procedure for cutting away the parachute from the aircraft after it's crashed, or is that something just left to fire, crash, and rescue folks for them to cut the parachute away using a standard set of cutters? In our old Air Force training, of course, when the parachute was attached to us, it was vitally critical that we learned how to quickly get the parachute disconnected from us before it dragged us through the trees, bushes, and ditches. The FAA said they will need to use a crane to remove the plane from the property. So let's take a look at the Cirrus manual a bit here and ask some general questions amongst the Cirrus community. How do you manage fuel? And even if you had a fuel leak on board your Cirrus aircraft, how would you manage that, and how would you know that you have a fuel leak? The Cirrus SR22 aircraft is a pretty simple, straightforward single-engine design, but it has a lot of complicated avionics involved in the aircraft. I have no time in the Cirrus myself, by the way. The fuel system consists of 2 tanks, a left and a right tank, both 46 gallons each. The fuel selector has 3 options: left tank, right tank, or off. A limitation on board the aircraft, or a limitation of the aircraft, is that you can have a fuel imbalance of no greater than 10 gallons difference between the left and right tank. The Cirrus also has an engine-driven fuel pump, which I believe is a altitude compensating engine-driven fuel pump, which helps you automatically control the mixture control on the aircraft. And it also has a series of electric fuel boost pumps to help you when you are starting the engine, priming the engine, or when you're switching fuel tanks. The Cirrus aircraft also has 2 fuel gauges and 2 fuel sending units located in each fuel tank, and they are float type fuel sending units that send fairly accurate fuel quantity information to the 2 fuel gauges located on your electronic display. Also on board the Cirrus aircraft is a very accurate fuel totalizer, and the fuel totalizer uses the fuel flow to accurately calculate how many gallons of fuel are burned, and in conjunction with the GPS can also give you range, time, and distance calculations as well. But if in the event that you should have a fuel leak, well, first off, if you had a fuel leak, in most cases the engine would not run or would run very poorly. But is it possible to get a fuel leak where the engine continues to run? Well, possibly. Would the fuel totalizer pick up that fuel leak? Probably not. The fuel totalizer is only going to register the amount of fuel running through the fuel flow transducer, and that fuel flow transducer is located downstream of the entire fuel system just before the fuel enters the fuel injection system on the engine. The fuel totalizer works completely independent of the fuel gauges. Again, the fuel gauges just work off of the float indicators inside the tanks and register on the instrument panel. The Garmin G1000 GPS also has an alerting system that you can program to alert you to darn near anything, including you can set a 30-minute or however many minute fuel reminder that you want to set up to establish a reminder as to when you want to change the tanks every 30 minutes, every 45 minutes, so that you maintain a fairly even fuel balance between the 2 tanks and remain within the 10-gallon fuel difference limitation. Now, in old school airplanes like this 1952 Beechcraft Bonanza, years before we had fuel totalizers or G1000 GPSs that could set reminders for us, we had the watch, the clock, and a knee board and a pen, and you would write down exactly how many minutes you ran each fuel tank on. So you'd note your takeoff time, how many minutes before you switch tanks, and it's best if you write down left tank or right tank and how many minutes you spend on each tank, and keep that total in your mind, and that helps you keep situational awareness of where your fuel is. And on a lot of these older aircraft, you would often, the only way that you would know that you completely used all the fuel from one tank is to literally run one tank dry, or at least until the fuel flow gauge begins to flicker, and then quickly change to the other fuel tank. I don't see a prohibition against this in the Cirrus manual, but I don't think it's a widely used technique in the Cirrus community. On board the Cirrus, there's also an excellent fuel alerting system, a fuel low level alerting system. If you get less than 14 gallons in one fuel tank, you'll get a white CAS message on your instrument panel. If you get less than 14 gallons in both fuel tanks, you'll get an amber low fuel alert message on your instrument panel in the Cirrus. So regardless of what your totalizer is telling you as you go through the flight, you got to pay attention to those fuel gauges and what they're telling you, and hopefully you've been backing up those fuel gauges with your own timer, your own watch, so that you have the situational awareness to realize how tight you really are on fuel without overly relying on the G1000 fuel totalizer itself. So given the distance of this flight from Hollywood to Colusa County, Northern California, that was easily within the range of this aircraft, depending upon how much fuel you put in the airplane before you departed for the flight. And it should have been easy to manage that amount of fuel for that short of a flight, even with the north winds. And the sad fact about this particular accident is there were plenty of appropriate divert airports within very close range of this aircraft, of where this aircraft eventually ended up. So I'm looking for more information from the Cirrus community here. How do you manage your fuel in your Cirrus? Do you like to start on the left tank, run it down 10 gallons, then switch to the right tank and run it down 20 gallons, keeping a 10-gallon difference? Or do you like to keep track of the time? Or do you just let the fuel totalizer do all the work? And what do you do if in the event there's a fuel leak or an error in your fuel totalizer reading? Thanks so much for your support of this channel. Thanks so much for your support over on Patreon that makes this content possible. See you here. Hey, little postscript here. Here's Jason from Finer Points. You have instructed quite a bit in Cirrus aircraft.
Yeah, definitely. CSIP, I got that twice actually, because you have to keep it current every year, and I've gone through the training twice because I didn't actually keep it current.
What's the name of that training again?
It's CSIP, Cirrus Standardized Instructor Program. It's done through the factory. First I did it was up in Minnesota, and then we did it in Tennessee the second time.
So regarding fuel management, how do you like to teach fuel management in the Cirrus? Old school style, or use the Totalizer, or mixture of both? Or
yeah, to be quite honest, I mean, like, there are some limitations to the way it's done a lot, right? Everyone relies on the Totalizer for their total quantity. Like, no one's really looking at those gauges. Even those are the only ones that are tied to the fuel tanks themselves, right? So even though I teach generally old school procedures, that's generally my thinking with the Cirrus, is that the factory taught them everything they need to know about the computers and about all the SOPs. What I want to do is turn off the computer screens, use the backup gauges, and just remind people that this is just an airplane, right? It's just a big engine and a wing, and it flies like any other airplane. There's nothing mystical about it, nothing magical about it. It's just an airplane. So I'll teach, like, my normal fuel management, but I have to be honest, after talking this accident over with you, I'm not sure that I'm putting enough emphasis on monitoring the total quantity on the old gauges. That could be a hole in the system that I'm willing to look at. And
because the Totalizer is completely separate from the gauges, and there could be a difference between the two, what the Totalizer is telling you and what the gauges are.
100%. And the reason you can trust the Totalizer so much is because it's so accurate, assuming you don't have a leak, right?
Garbage
like, if you
in, garbage out.
Exactly, garbage in. As long as you put in the good inputs, I mean, I think I was telling you, I flew once from Oshkosh to the West Coast, and we had such a heavy load with the dihedral on the wings, I didn't actually see fuel in the tanks the whole trip. I just had to set the Totalizer when we left and fill the tanks up and keep programming the Totalizer.
But you visually look at the tanks that they are topped off when you fill them up.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying. You couldn't see it, so I had to trust these gauges here because the dihedral on the wing was such that the fuel never made it up to where the
filler cap is?
Yeah, so I'd look in, it would look bone dry. And so I had to make sure, okay, we put some fuel in, it's right there, but I was betting my life on that Totalizer. So, these are things where, as we invent new things, we don't really understand the problems that we're creating. Like you said, like everyone thinks GPS is like this miracle thing, but there's a lot of mistakes you can make.
That's right. Few things still work.
Keep it simple, stupid. It's like, so this accident that you're looking at, I think, is really important, and I'm going to take a good look at the way I teach it too.
Good, excellent. Thanks for dropping in.
You bet. Thank you.
See you here.